And welcome back to Bengal Bites, a podcast about the Cincinnati Bengals from a real, honest perspective. I'm your host, Derek. This is episode 99, and we are finding ourselves in new and uncertain territory with the Cincinnati Bengals as they have lost 2 in a row now in very embarrassing, demoralizing fashion. This game on Monday Night Football loss came at the hands of the Denver Broncos, 28-3. Bengals didn't manage to get any touchdowns in this game, obviously. Not a good showing on the national stage. Not what we were looking for. All week they were talking about, how do you bounce back from that horrible defeat in week 3 to the Minnesota Vikings, 48-10. At least, they only lost by 25 instead of 38 in this game. I guess that was an improvement. And there were no turnovers, no fumbles, no interceptions by anybody on the Bengals. So you can't say that same thing beat them twice. They learned the lessons from last week, took those into this week. But then I guess they found new ways to be terrible this week. Penalties were the biggest theme of the night on this one. There were so many penalties in this game. It was on both sides. This officiating crew was very flag happy, throwing flags. It seemed like on half of the plays there were over 15 combined penalties between both teams. The Bengals had 11 accepted penalties. They must have had at least 15 on their own, and then the Broncos had 10. There was 25 at least flags thrown in this game. Way too many. I know we want to get everything right, but this was out of hand. The announcers were exasperated with it, saying nothing brings a game to a grinding halt like throwing a bunch of penalties. That was the theme after the game for Zac Taylor. Last week, he was blaming it on turnovers. Can't let the turnovers beat you. This week, penalties, can't commit all those self-inflicted wounds. Tough environment on the road, Zac Taylor acts like it's impossible to win any road games. Since this is an honest and real perspective, I'm going to have to give you some honest takes about Zac Taylor in this one. He hasn't done his Monday press conference yet, but it doesn't matter. The press conference he gave after the game last night was record short amount of time. It was only 3 minutes. He got up there, and when he's in those kind of situations where they just lost embarrassingly, the more negative things seem, the faster he talks. He's always got an explanation and an excuse for why, of course, it makes sense that we just got embarrassed on national TV. Well, if we commit all those penalties and don't give ourselves any momentum, of course we're going to get beat by 25. After the game, Ja'Marr Chase apparently told someone, a reporter, I didn't see the video of it yet. I don't know if there is video, but they had a quote from Ja'Marr Chase after the game that said that basically it didn't seem like that they on offense wanted it, and you got to want it, and it didn't seem like they wanted it enough. We also saw during the game Ja'Marr Chase showing some frustration on the sidelines, going up to Zac Taylor, and couldn't really tell what he was saying, but obviously, if he's the number one receiver in the league, it's probably like, hey, why can't we get me the ball more? Ja'Marr didn't really do a whole lot. I think he had, let me check the stats. Ja'Marr Chase, 5 catches, 23 yards, no touchdowns, long of 10 on 8 targets, but only 23 yards. Obviously not enough production for Ja'Marr Chase in that one. So he was going up to Zach and trying to say, hey, why can't we scheme me open, do something? T. Higgins, 3 catches on 6 targets, 32 yards, no touchdowns, long of 19 for T. He early had a nice catch against Riley Moss on the first drive of the game for the Bengals. Bengals came out, and the only successful drive that the Bengals were able to muster in this game was the very first one before the Broncos defense, I guess, had a chance to adapt and react. It looked like it was going to be another situation they could take advantage of a mismatch on number 21 for the Broncos, Riley Moss. He also had a holding penalty on Jamar Chase. I don't know if it was this drive or the second drive, but early in the game, they were going after Riley Moss. So, okay, it looked like the Bengals had something going. They were able to run the ball effectively on early downs on that first drive. Chase Brown, I think that was the first drive where he picked up his long of the game of 6 yards. Chase Brown in the game, 10 carries for 40 yards. So that was another improvement, you could say. At least Chase Brown last week had 10 carries for 3 yards. 10 carries in this game for 40 yards, big improvement. Not great considering that the Broncos had their first 100-yard rusher in a game since Sean Payton has been the head coach for the Broncos. I think they said it was like the 37 games in a row. It was the longest streak in the NFL where a team had not had a running back or anybody go over 100 yards rushing in a game. Of course, it comes against the Bengals on Monday Night Football. Al Golden's defense, they were saying they were playing vanilla in the preseason because they didn't want to give anything away. But then ESPN showed a statistic that the Bengals have blitzed 0% of plays in the first quarter. And they were like the number 2 lowest blitzing team in the, since the last 25 years or something, whenever they started doing statistics about when teams blitz. Maybe it was like the last 10 years. But whatever the ESPN statistics went back to, Bengals had like below 10%. I think it was like 6 or 7% rate of blitzing. Not an aggressive defense. Now, 28-3, Bengals defense, I guess you could say, didn't do as bad as last week. I don't know. The score is kind of deceptive because the Bengals combined gave up over 500 yards of total offense, but the Broncos, only scored 4 touchdowns, 28 points. So in that regard, it was more of the Broncos just moving the ball at will. Bo Nix had 326 passing yards. It was a very balanced attack for the Broncos. 326 through the air, 186 rushing yards for the Broncos. Compared to the Bengals on offense, they continue to be the worst offense in the NFL. Bengals only had 159 total yards of offense in this game, 53 rushing, and 106 passing. Bengals still haven't eclipsed 55 rushing yards as a team so far in 4 games this season. Zac Taylor is supposed to be the offensive genius. They hired him to be the offensive mastermind. He's the one scheming everything up, calling the plays. And this is a good Broncos defense, no doubt about it. They were able to put pressure on Jake Browning in this game, but not as much as it wasn't like Jake Browning was getting hit on every play. The Broncos had 6 quarterback hits in this game, but, so that's not terrible. Jake Browning got sacked 3 times. It could have been worse, honestly. The Broncos were averaging, I think, 4 sacks coming into this, so only 3 sacks. They managed to do a relatively good job of protecting Jake Browning. It's just that they had to sell out to do it. They were down Noah Fant, their usual tight end, but they still were going more 3 wide receiver sets. Andre Yosivas and Mitch Tinsley played more in this game than they had in the previous 3 games. And they were also, it seemed like, using 6 and 7 man protections to prevent the Broncos from blitzing. early in the game. But also Jake Browning was being ultra conservative with his decision making. It seemed like he talked about all the turnovers he had committed, 5 interceptions through 2 games. And he said that in the interviews leading into this game, Jake Browning mentioned how he was, completing 70% of his passes, but his bad decisions were turning into too many interceptions instead of incompletions. He said when he watched other games from around the league, quarterbacks, their bad decisions ended up in incomplete passes. So maybe Jake Browning was going too far in the opposite direction of trying not to make a bad play worse, turning into an interception. He became too risk averse. Like he was throwing the ball, on the sidelines, trying to keep it away from the safety or somebody coming over from the middle of the field, but it was uncatchable passes. He's throwing it out of bounds where even T. Higgins can't go up and keep his feet in bounds to catch these. Or there were plays where he would get flushed out of the pocket and he would just throw the ball into the sidelines, throw it into the bench, throw it away and not give up an interception, which is, better than turning the ball over, but that's obviously a wasted play. If you just run around and throw the ball into the bench, nothing good is going to come out of that. So Jake Browning ended up 14 for 25, passing under 60%. That's only 56%. And I think coming into this, he was one of the most, accurate passers the Bengals have ever had percentage-wise. But it doesn't matter, like Jake Browning said after the game, it doesn't matter that they didn't fumble or turn the ball over. They didn't move the ball either, so it doesn't matter that, they still had to punt a lot. And unfortunately, Ryan Rico had like a 25-yard punt at one point in this game. It must have, I don't know what happened. I haven't gone back and watched all the film on this one, but this was one of the worst punts I've seen in a long time. Ryan Rico struggles with the consistency for some reason. That was disappointing. We needed a better showing out of our special teams. There was a play in this game. It was weird. The returner, Marvin Mims for the Broncos, he was catching a high punt from Ryan Rico, and he did a fair catch sign, waving his arm over his head to signal that he's, protected. The Bengals aren't allowed to interfere with him while he's trying to make the catch. PJ Jules was coming down, and he slowed down, but then Marvin Mims bobbled the catch initially. And so PJ Jules tried to take the ball away from him on the bobble, but I forget, they called it as a penalty, but then after the game, Zac Taylor said that it wasn't a penalty, that it was just down at that spot. So I think it was just a weird play, and it looked like for a minute maybe the Bengals would be able to get the ball back if somehow they ruled it a muffed punt and it went back to the Bengals. That was one of the plays maybe you thought the Bengals had a chance, but the Bengals never really had a chance after the first quarter, I'd say, in this game. And that decision, let's go back to that first drive. The decision to kick the field goal instead of going for it on 4th and 2, I believe it was. I'm on ESPN pulling up the play-by-play here. Bengals had 4th and 2 from the Denver 8-yard line. And instead of trying to pick up a first down to extend that drive and pick up those 2 yards, Bengals decided to kick the 26-yard field goal to take the 3-0 lead. Zac Taylor always talks about, got to play with a lead. But a 3-0 lead isn't the same as a 7-0 lead, because obviously a couple drives later, Broncos came back and scored a touchdown to go up 7-3. In that moment, I was thinking back to one of the things I saw going around on the internet about how Zac Taylor was one of the least aggressive decision makers on fourth down in terms of these analytics of like win percentage gained or lost on certain plays or certain decisions. And they were saying like Zac Taylor had lost all kinds of win percentage this season by deciding to kick or punt on fourth down instead of going for it when the analytics say you're supposed to go for it. In this situation, I didn't go back and look at what the analytics say, but it felt like to me when the Bengals are on the road, tough environment, all that kind of stuff, what better way to get the crowd out of the game than to pick up a critical fourth down and maybe even a touchdown. For whatever reason, they go for the field goal, and then they never got the ball into Denver territory the rest of the game. That was the closest the Bengals ever got to sniffing a touchdown in this game, and they decided to go for the field goal instead. And that pretty much sums up Zac Taylor in a nutshell. They're never going to get anywhere. They got to that Super Bowl loss. They were right on the doorstep of ultimate victory, and that's what's been carrying Zac Taylor the rest of the way, even though the results without Joe Burrow have been absolutely terrible. Zac Taylor's record, I think at this point after this game, was 48-53-1, but without Joe Burrow, 48-54-1 after this game. But without Joe Burrow in the lineup, Zac Taylor's record falls precipitously to 8-24. Without Joe Burrow, he's only winning 25% of his games, and so far this season without Joe Burrow starting, he's been 0-2. Again, I wouldn't put this game completely on Jake Browning because, like he said after the game, he was just throwing the ball where it was supposed to go on the play or where it was designed to go. He wasn't necessarily making bad decisions. And I didn't feel like it was necessarily a Jake Browning issue. He was playing within the offense. It's just that the offense he was playing within was not well designed. I think it was another case of Broncos defense got him. Like Dan Pitcher said about the Vikings last week, he was like, yeah, good plan. They were able to counter everything we did, and credit to them, they got us. I think Vance Joseph, the defensive coordinator for the Broncos, got Dan Pitcher and all these offensive masterminds that the Bengals have on their coaching staff. But of course, after the game, I'm jumping all around here, but after the game, Zac Taylor says that he isn't concerned at all. He knows that they've got the right people, the right players, and the right coaches. Everybody in the locker room is going to do a good job to get this thing corrected, turned around. No panic. Nobody's panicking. Everything's fine. It's really amazing how much confidence Zac Taylor has in himself and his abilities and the coach's abilities and everybody on the team after they've just suffered the two worst back-to-back losses I can remember in the history of my Bengals fandom. I don't remember a team getting beat back-to-back weeks combined 76-13. And especially because this game, it was the big stage. They had Joe Buck and Troy Aikman calling the game on ESPN and ABC. You could get this game. I was watching this over the antenna for free. Anybody could get this game that wanted to watch. And like the announcer said, this was not the kind of performance that the Bengals wanted to put out on a national stage. This isn't what you want to showcase as the product for consumers. They wonder why the Bengals don't get invited to go to these overseas games. How come the Bengals aren't a big market team? Because they go on national TV and look like this. Tennessee Titans, completely different team, but their head coach, Brian Callahan, gave up play calling duties, and the results got even worse. They got shut out. They didn't score any points. I think they lost to the Houston Texans 26-0. Who knows how long Brian Callahan is going to last? He may be able to come back and be a consultant for the Bengals. He's familiar with Zac Taylor and was best friends with him. And another guy who didn't play quarterback in the NFL, but his dad was a coach and yada, yada, yada. He's in the club of coaches. All these guys know each other. All their grandfathers probably were coaches together. Who knows? But Brian Callahan's probably going to get fired sooner rather than later. I'm just thinking out loud here. I don't want him to come back to the Bengals. I don't think he would help at this point. He's not having any good results. And Joe Burrow is injured. So, what is he going to do with Jake Browning? Like I said, though, they're not going to trade for anybody. I keep seeing these stories that are just blaming everything on... I just read the headlines. I don't even read the stories because who has time for that? But they keep saying, the Bengals have to trade for quarterback X, who is completely washed up and isn't playing for his current team for a very good reason. Bengals aren't going to give up any assets at this point. They've got Joe Burrow at a massive contract. They can't afford to spend any more money. You already saw they were so stingy with offensive linemen. They're bringing in guys who are obviously way over the hill and paying them like veteran minimum or just barely above that. Lucas Patrick and Dalton Reisner, for example. Those type of financial decisions don't make me think the Bengals are in any hurry to spend multiple millions of dollars on a quarterback that isn't familiar with Zac Taylor or his scheme. He's already got Mike White waiting in the wings. If anything happens to Jake Browning, they got Brett Rippon, who is supposedly one of these high school prodigy quarterbacks that Zac Taylor is so enamored with. But I think they're going to stick with Jake Browning for the foreseeable future, unless and until he gets injured. But Jamar Chase, he's not living up to his expectations, obviously. He has goals and aspirations and wants to make it to a Pro Bowl every year. At this rate, it's going to be extremely difficult to make it anywhere near the Pro Bowl if he's getting, 25 or less yards a game. He's not used to that kind of production. And Zac Taylor in the past has figured out a way. His coaching staff has figured out a way to adapt. And it takes some time normally, but it's been 2 weeks. Can't completely change the offense to suit a different style in just a week, or maybe 2 weeks apparently, but at some point they've got to get it figured out to just make it a competitive, respectable game. Losing by 25, that's not even keeping people interested. That's the problem, is if they keep playing like this, people are just going to lose interest completely, not want to watch. My friend, who's always asking me what's going on in the game, I was like, you're going to watch the game? They're like, I don't know. Maybe I'll do something else. Because they keep getting burned. Why spend all your time? You could be doing anything. Imagine all the things that I could have been doing instead of watching this Bengals game. I was so excited leading up to this game because it's on Monday night. You see all the games going on Sunday, watching all the other teams play, and it was kind of fun to watch Red Zone. But on the other hand, you feel like you're kind of missing out because your team isn't playing. But you just got to wait that one extra day. It's kind of like if Christmas was on the 26th of December for only you and everybody else was opening their presents, the day before you or something. Or the people who do it like on Christmas Eve, which is weird. But anyway, I, needless to say, was excited. I went and got Skyline. For the first time ever, I got not the out of the can, fake or anything like that, or making it at home. I went to the Skyline restaurant and I ordered the spaghetti and the coney dog. I got them both. It was okay. It was missing something for me, honestly. Maybe Mr. Fancy Pants, but I need a little bit more complexity. It wasn't bad, but after after the first quarter of eating it, I think I had about enough. And that's kind of what the Bengals looked like in this game. After about the first quarter, they kind of had enough of playing in this game. Perhaps some of that could have been due to the altitude. The Bengals, guess when they got to Denver? They showed them on social media arriving Sunday night. Obviously, the night before the game is supposed to happen. So they barely had like 24 hours maybe to adjust to the altitude. And the reporters were asking them, what did they do to prepare? And they were like, oh yeah, in practice, we just worked on, blocking a extra second and a half and just trying to focus on concentrating when you're fatigued. So basically they didn't do anything to prepare for the altitude. We saw Trey Hendrickson coming out of the game looking like he was winded and needing to take a break. So I'm sure there were points in this game where it looked like the Bengals on defense were just kind of standing there, getting blocked, not really having a lot of fight in them, let's say. And the announcers noticed that as well, and especially in the first half when the Bengals were committing penalties on like every play. And it was like false start, illegal motion, illegal, like all kinds of everything. Didn't look like a professional football team out there. And the announcers said, yeah, the Bengals, they just don't look like they have any energy. They don't have any pep in their step, no bounce in the step. And they pointed directly to coaching. They were like, this comes down to coaching. The coach has to get the team prepared, ready to go. And they were calling out Zac Taylor, which was kind of a surprise because leading up to this, in the preview, Joe Buck was talking to the Bengals media department, and he was like, oh, I really like Zac Taylor. He's such a smart guy, and you can tell he really cares and blah, blah, blah. And then they get in the game, and they stab him in the back. They're like, man, this coaching from Zac Taylor is terrible. But I'm glad somebody had to say it because I really feel like too often Zac Taylor gets a pass because of the good performance of Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. Without that connection, Zac Taylor is really not a good coach at all, I don't think. He never was. He's completely overmatched in every matchup he goes up against. Like Sean Payton versus Zac Taylor, are you kidding me? But obviously, Sean Payton makes probably 3.5 times more money than Zac Taylor. That's the reason, part of the reason, they were able to hire Zac Taylor in the first place because he had no experience, so he couldn't demand a big salary. They gave him a small raise, but he wasn't demanding a huge raise after that Super Bowl and AFC Championship back-to-back. He was like, hey, give me, security, job security, because he is under contract now until 2026. So I feel like at this point, Zac Taylor, he can say, this is my 7th year in the league. I've been around. I've seen everything. I went to the Super Bowl, blah, blah, blah. How dare you question me and my tactics? Of course I know what I'm doing. At this point, I feel like anybody who is still defending Zac Taylor, and there must be people defending Zac Taylor. There must be Zac Taylor fans out there. I think AI is everywhere. It's mostly hype. Don't believe the hype. But I asked AI to take a look at my podcast, try to give me, some critical feedback because I'm not, the most popular podcast out there. So I was like, AI, what do you think? And it was like, well, you're kind of spending a lot of time criticizing Zac Taylor, the head coach, and maybe you should back off on that and be more positive. And maybe the fans won't like hearing bad things about the coach. But, sometimes, like I said, the coach needs to be criticized because the results, the performances that I'm seeing from the team are leaving me frustrated and disappointed. I know the players don't want to lose. They don't want to go out there and be embarrassed. They may have family watching this game either on television or in person. This is their job. This is their livelihood. This is supposedly what they're getting paid money, all this millions of dollars to do. They don't want to go out there and look like crap. But that's what it's looked like. And defensively, last week they had some stops. This week, they didn't have so many stops, especially in the first half. Broncos got 3 touchdowns. They gave up. Demetrius Knight had a nice play in the end zone. The Broncos went for it on 4th and goal, basically. They had it down inside the 5 on the Bengals. Maybe they could have picked up a first down, but it was within the 5-yard line. They were going for a touchdown. Bo Nix, he was at times kind of indecisive, not throwing the ball early enough, and he waited too long, threw it up for grabs into the end zone, and got intercepted. Nice play by Demetrius Knight that moved the ball out to the 20-yard line, and there was just a minute and a half left to go in the second quarter. And so at that point, that was like the one flash in the game you thought maybe the Bengals had a chance, because backing up here, the Bengals got off to that field goal start. They forced a punt on the Broncos, first drive of the game, 3 and out. So scoring drive, even though they didn't get a touchdown, the Bengals defense forced that 3 and out. Bengals came back on their next drive, ended in a punt back to the Broncos, who immediately went down, scored a touchdown, 9 plays, 64 yards to close out the first quarter, going up 7-3. After that, Bengals basically don't do anything. They get 1 first down and then punt it away. Broncos come back. Next drive, another touchdown. So 2 touchdowns on back-to-back long drives for the Broncos, where they just drove it down the field. Not a lot of resistance in the run or the pass early from the Bengals. Broncos took that early 14-3 lead. Bengals don't respond with anything on offense. 2 back-to-back 3 and outs with only 1 yard gained between those 2. No time taken off the clock. But they did have that 1 interception. But unfortunately, Bengals gave the ball back to the Broncos with a minute and 10 seconds left to go in the second quarter. Broncos take it 9 plays, 80 yards all the way down the field in a minute and 1 second and score a touchdown on 3rd and long, where they didn't have any timeouts, but they threw it into the end zone for Courtland Sutton, who made a tough catch on Dax Hill, who wasn't able to strip the ball out in time. Courtland Sutton's like 6'4", 215 pounds, so that's a tough matchup. He made some tough physical catches in this game against the Bengals defensive backs, but that was kind of demoralizing. The Bengals, it looked for a moment like maybe they would have a chance to potentially score some points if the offense could figure out anything. Of course, they didn't, and gave the ball back to the Broncos with enough time for them to go down and score a touchdown anyway. The Broncos could have been up by 28-3 if they didn't get that interception. But basically, they got the touchdown that they missed on the previous drive with only a minute off the clock. 21-3 at halftime. Coming out of the half, Broncos didn't do anything with it. They just traded punts, and it seemed like the Broncos were content to just bleed time off of the clock, shorten the game up. It was 21-3 all throughout the third quarter. And the way that the Bengals were so inept at everything on offense, it felt like the game was going to be over at that point. Basically, after 7-3, the game was basically over because the Bengals just could not do anything at all on offense. It was, again, it was, they were finding new ways to be bad. They weren't fumbling. They weren't turning the ball over. But also, Patrick Surtain was locking down Jamar Chase one-on-one most of the game. So they were trying to keep the ball away from him, understandably, because he's the defensive player of the year from last year. But the Bengals didn't have any other answers. That was the thing. They were forcing other players to beat them. The Broncos were forcing the Bengals to beat them in other ways besides T. Higgins and Ja'Marr Chase. They took a few shots, but not enough, and didn't complete on any deep passes. They tried some screens, but Mike Gesicki, I'm thinking about one specific play. They tried to run a screen pass to Ja'Marr Chase to get him the ball, but Mike Gesicki just made a terrible effort or not effective on his block for Ja'Marr Chase, where he basically just got pushed into Ja'Marr Chase by the defender, and the defender ended up tackling both of them. I think it was only a loss of one or no gain, but not effective. And it was just night and day difference because the Broncos, they would run very similar plays to the Bengals, except their guys would be wide open and they would have blocking, and the Bengals would be missing all the tackles, especially Cam Taylor-Britt. Cam Taylor-Britt was injured last week with a hamstring injury. He did not play. And then he practiced this week, and supposedly he was good to go. He only played 5 plays, I think, in this game, but he must have given up 2 or 3 catches in those 5 plays and missed 2 or 3 tackles on there. He looked like he was injured because you couldn't tell whether it was, I just made a bad play and so I'm going to limp because act like I'm hurt and that's why I gave up that big, catch and run, or is he actually injured? It was hard to tell, but they put Marco Wilson in and Josh Newton at cornerback instead of Cam Taylor-Britt, and he was on the sidelines for the rest of the game. We'll have to watch that on the injury report to see if Cam Taylor-Britt is having another recurrence of that hamstring. But that's like I mentioned in the previous episode, with those hamstrings, those can be sensitive to reoccurrence of injury. Hopefully it's not something that lingers throughout the season, but you don't want to come back too early. Whatever the case was, Cam Taylor-Britt was looking like a bum out there. And from the defensive perspective, they're still missing much of a pass rush. They got one quarterback hit on Bo Nix from Cam Sample. Otherwise, Trey Hendrickson didn't do anything. Myles Murphy didn't get any pressure. Bo Nix was able to, outrun everybody, even when he did get a little bit of pressure in his face. Chris Jenkins, TJ Slayton, Mike Pennell hasn't really flashed anything as far as a pass rusher. He's mostly a run stopper. Linebackers, Logan Wilson, Demetrius Knight, Barrett Carter, Oren Burks. I mean, they made a few plays here and there, but they didn't break up any passes or come on any blitzes. I'm trying to think just from a defensive perspective. The safeties, Geno Stone and Jordan Battle, they both had a fair amount of tackles. Let me look at the leading tacklers for the Bengals. Demetrius Knight Jr., linebacker, had 10 tackles. He was tied with Geno Stone with 10 tackles. And then Dax Hill and Jordan Battle both had 9 tackles apiece. Dax Hill had a couple nice plays, but he also gave up that touchdown to Cortland Sutton. Jordan Battle, it was inconsistent. He missed a couple tackles here and there, but he also made a couple plays. BJ Hill had a tackle for loss on a nice play where he ran the running back down all the way to the sideline. So showing some nice athleticism by BJ Hill. But it was more of a case, I didn't feel like it was completely on the defense in this one. Like I said, they gave up over 500 yards. They gave up 4 touchdowns, but they did have a interception stop in the red zone. So that was a good play for the Bengals on defense. But just the offense. You can't win any games or expect a defense to win a game for you when you only score 3 points. Maybe the one small bright spot was Andre Yossi had his second catch of the season. It was the longest catch of anybody on the Bengals. 1 catch for 22 yards on 1 target. So at least he's getting involved in the offense a little bit. But the biggest, there's going to be tons of statistics and people on social media posting about how the Bengals are historically bad, especially offensively, I'm sure. But if you look at it, it's kind of remarkable. The Bengals have, in terms of yards, the Bengals have the worst offense and also like the number 30 defense in the NFL right now. So they're basically like the worst on offense and defense. So that's not good, probably. I don't know. Not what we want to see out of this team. We mentioned going into this game, this was going to be kind of a referendum or this is going to be a litmus test to tell us which direction is this Bengals team headed after losing their star quarterback in Joe Burrow. Are they going to rebound? Are they going to bounce back, show some fight, some backbone? Or are they going to just kind of fold up the tents and take a beating every game for the rest of the season? It's looking like more of the latter is happening right now. And to me, that's a reflection on the head coach. I mean, obviously he can't control the players and along his offensive line now, especially. But the attitude, the aggression, the whatever it is to get the people on the team fired up and ready to go and believing in themselves and motivated. Zac Taylor, for all of his strengths as a schemer or play caller or whatever it is, he's not a great motivator. I didn't see him going up and down the sidelines trying to get his guys pumped up into the game, ready to go. It was just another game of Zac Taylor with his headset on, staring down at his clipboard or his play sheet and not looking to get his team. Jamar Chase was going up to him, getting his attention, telling him, hey, coach, we need to do this or that. It wasn't the coach going to the players and saying, he was off in his own kind of fantasy land. And I feel like he feels above any kind of criticism. His job is safe. He doesn't have to worry about anything. So he can just kind of sit back and call the plays and, if we got beat 28-3 or 48-10 or whatever it is, I can still go home and still collect paychecks. And it's not that big a deal for Zac Taylor. He doesn't actually care. He just gets in front of the cameras, talks into the microphone, says all the right things because he's got the media training to, act like he's really concerned about this loss and it's really tearing him up inside. But at the end of the day, I think that's all just a lot of hot air. That's all Zac Taylor ever was all a bunch of hot air. And this is disappointing for me as a Bengals fan because, like I said, I got so excited, so much energy of my day thinking about watching this game. I was excited to sit down and watch my team play. And then to see that kind of performance, it was disappointing, frustrating, embarrassing. All the feelings I'm sure that the players feel. I'm not saying I'm feeling anything that the players aren't. But just as a collective fan base, this is so deflating. People were talking about, the Dave Laphams of the world are talking about how, before this season, how the Bengals are going to go to the Super Bowl and they're going to win it and Joe Burrow is going to be the MVP, all this and that. All that is completely evaporated. That's all a bunch of hogwash, as they would say. I'm going to try not to curse so much in this episode. As much as I want to, this team makes me want to curse, but I will not do it. I will not give in to the frustrations yet, because this is a long season. My blood pressure can only take so much of this. Maybe I'll go out and check the garden. That's, take a walk. Get outside, touch some grass, all that stuff that the kids do these days. Take my mind off of this stupid football team for a bit. But I'll be back. Maybe I'll have some more thoughts after I watch the replay. This is just kind of like a first reaction. I didn't watch the All 22. I didn't grind the tape on this, believe it or not. Didn't want to go back and watch and see how the Bengals lost this one. But maybe I'll need something between now and that Lions game to get ready because I don't want to think about that Lions game that's coming up. It's going to be a home game. And the only positive you can take out of these past two humiliating defeats was that they were not home games where the fans could boo and show their displeasure at the team and the way they're performing. You don't want to have this kind of performance in front of the home crowd because they're going to be feeling what I'm feeling, but maybe even worse come next week if the Lions put another beat down for the third game in a row on the Bengals. Fans are going to be ready to revolt at that point. So it's a nice day. It's a nice week, you know. It's been a drought, so I guess you got to just adapt to your environment. You don't always get what you want. It's a drought. Okay, maybe go to the beach, whatever. I'm sure it'll be more enjoyable than watching this team lose more games. But we'll be back next episode for another breakdown, possibly the preview. I don't know. We'll see how much energy I have. But leave me your comments, subscribe, thumbs up, all the stuff you're supposed to do. And you can email me, bengalbitespodcast@gmail.com, if you have some way that this team could improve or how I could improve this podcast for you, the listener. I know you have lots of things you could do with your time, so if you listened all the way, you must be some kind of a loyal fan. So let me know what you think. But on that somber note, I'm going to leave you with a hooday and stay hungry for more Bengal Bites.